History is marked by towering figures whose names evoke images of conquest, terror, and absolute power. These men ruled with iron fists, leaving trails of blood and devastation in their wake. Today, we explore the lives of some of the most ruthless rulers in history. Men like Genghis Khan, whose relentless campaigns reshaped Asia and Europe, and Vlad the Impaler, whose sadistic methods earned him a place in the darkest annals of human cruelty. But they weren't alone. Across the globe, other leaders wielded similar brutality, crafting legacies of violence that have withstood the test of time. This is the story of ruthless rulers, men whose thirst for power knew no limits and whose reigns were defined by a singular pursuit: domination at any cost. Genghis Khan, the conqueror of the world. The name Genghis Khan strikes fear, and for good reason. Born as Timur in 1162 on the windswept steppes of Mongolia, he grew from a boy abandoned by his own tribe into one of the greatest military leaders the world has ever known. But Genghis Khan's empire was not built through negotiation or diplomacy. It was forged in fire, blood, and terror. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, an expanse larger than any empire before or since. His secret? A combination of brutal military tactics and psychological warfare. In 1219, when the Shah of Khwarezm betrayed a trade agreement, Genghis Khan retaliated with a fury unmatched in history. His armies razed entire cities to the ground, slaughtered millions, and left no survivors in their wake. The devastation was so complete that some historians estimate up to 40 million people perished under Mongol rule. The mass destruction of entire civilizations was not an accident. It was a deliberate tactic. Genghis Khan understood that terror was a weapon as powerful as any sword, and he wielded it ruthlessly. Yet his cruelty was matched only by his brilliance. His use of highly disciplined cavalry, espionage, and innovative siege warfare techniques were ahead of their time. He was not just a destroyer, but also a builder, uniting disparate tribes into one of the most effective fighting forces ever seen. Genghis Khan's legacy is one of contrast, a man of boundless ambition and strategic genius, yet capable of unimaginable atrocities. Vlad the Impaler, the Prince of Horror. Vlad III, known to history as Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, was the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, a region located in modern-day Romania. Born in 1431 to a noble family in the small town of Sighișoara, Vlad's life was steeped in political conflict from the very beginning. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to defending Christendom from the rising Ottoman Empire. It is from this title, Dracul, meaning dragon or devil, that Vlad III would later derive his infamous nickname, Dracula, which means son of the dragon. Vlad's early years were defined by turmoil. At the age of 11, he and his younger brother Radu were handed over to the Ottoman Empire as political hostages by their father in exchange for the Ottomans' support. This period of captivity profoundly shaped Vlad's worldview. He was exposed to the inner workings of the Ottoman court, learning military tactics, diplomacy, and strategy, but also developing a deep hatred for his captors. While Radu eventually became a favorite of the Ottomans, even converting to Islam, Vlad harbored a lifelong grudge that would later fuel his notorious reign of terror. When Vlad returned to Wallachia as an adult, the region was in chaos. His father had been betrayed and killed by local nobles, or boyars, and Wallachia was constantly under threat from the powerful Ottoman Empire to the south and rival Christian factions to the north. Vlad sought to reclaim his father's throne and restore order to a land beset by enemies, both foreign and domestic. But his vision of order came at a terrible cost. Vlad quickly established himself as a ruler not to be crossed. His approach to governance was ruthless and uncompromising. He sought to consolidate power by purging the Wallachian nobility, who he saw as treacherous and corrupt. In one of his most infamous acts, Vlad invited the boyars to a grand feast, ostensibly to celebrate Easter. As they dined, his soldiers surrounded the hall, and Vlad had the nobles dragged outside and impaled on wooden stakes. Impalement was Vlad's signature method of execution, a brutal and agonizing process. Victims would be tied to stakes, which were then slowly inserted into their bodies, often through the abdomen or chest, while they were still alive. The stakes were planted in the ground, leaving the victims to die slowly, sometimes over the course of several days. This method of execution was not only cruel, but also highly symbolic. Impalement was a terrifying punishment, one meant to send a message of absolute power and total domination. For Vlad, it was a way to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies and to demonstrate that defiance or betrayal would be met with unimaginable suffering. But Vlad's brutality extended far beyond his dealings with the local nobility. In 1462, his kingdom faced its greatest external threat, an invasion by the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II, the same ruler who had captured Constantinople less than a decade earlier. Vlad's response to the Ottoman threat was as ruthless as it was effective. Knowing that his forces could not match the vast Ottoman army in open battle, Vlad employed a scorched earth tactic. He ordered his troops to destroy crops, poison wells, and burn villages, leaving nothing for the advancing Ottoman army to sustain itself. But his most notorious act came as the Ottomans approached the city of Târgoviște, his capital. There they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror, a forest of impaled corpses. Vlad had ordered the execution of thousands of prisoners, including Ottoman soldiers and Wallachian traders, and had their bodies displayed on stakes stretching for miles. Accounts from the time describe the scene in grisly detail, with corpses rotting in the sun, their blood soaked into the ground. The sight was so horrifying that Sultan Mehmed, a man who had seen countless acts of war and death, reportedly turned back in disgust, unwilling to engage with a ruler capable of such savagery. The forest of the impaled was not just a show of power, it was psychological warfare at its finest. Vlad understood that terror could be more effective than any sword or arrow. By confronting the Ottoman army with such a grotesque display, he sought to sap their morale and undermine their will to fight. And, for a time, it worked. The Ottomans withdrew, and Vlad's reign continued. Despite his reputation for cruelty, Vlad's rule had its defenders, particularly among his own people. For the common folk of Wallachia, Vlad was seen as a protector against foreign invaders, and a ruler who brought a measure of order to a region plagued by chaos. He was, after all, defending his land from one of the most powerful empires in the world. In his mind, the brutality he inflicted on his enemies was justified as a necessary means of securing Wallachia's independence. His harsh treatment of the boyars was also seen by some as a way to weaken the corrupt elite who had long exploited the peasants. Vlad's ruthlessness, however, knew no bounds. His sadism extended to even the smallest infractions. Legend has it that he once placed a golden chalice in the town square of Târgoviște, challenging his subjects to leave it untouched. Under his reign, so great was the fear of punishment that the chalice remained in place, untarnished and unmoved, for years. This story, while perhaps apocryphal, underscores the extent to which Vlad's reign was defined by fear, a fear that kept order but came at the price of widespread suffering. Timur, the lame conqueror. Moving eastward, we find another ruler whose brutality was legendary. Timur, or Tamerlane, as he is often known in the West. Born in 1336 in what is today Uzbekistan, Timur would become the scourge of Central Asia and the Middle East, carving out an empire with equal parts ruthlessness and strategy. Timur saw himself as the heir to Genghis Khan, and like the Mongol leader, he used terror as a tool of conquest. His campaigns were marked by an almost casual disregard for human life. When Timur's forces captured the city of Isfahan in 1387, they slaughtered 70,000 inhabitants and built a grisly tower out of their skulls. In Delhi, after taking the city in 1398, he ordered the execution of 100,000 captives. Entire cities were razed, and those who survived were often mutilated as a permanent reminder of his power. Yet Timur was also a patron of the arts and architecture, leaving behind a cultural legacy that contrasts sharply with his violent conquests. In Samarkand, the capital of his empire, he oversaw the construction of magnificent buildings that still stand today, symbols of his desire to be remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a ruler of grandeur. But his legacy remains dark, with many remembering him more for his cruelty than his contributions to art. Which ruthless ruler do you think had the greatest impact on history? Genghis Khan, Vlad the Impaler, or someone else? Let us know in the comments.